Hello. The Subtle Art of Not Giving F Times is a wonderful book on human development by the world-famous author Mark Manson, in which he argues that man does not necessarily have to be positive all the time, and that the key to a stronger and happier human being lies in dealing with adversity better. The following is a summary of the book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving F Times. First, don't try. In this chapter, the writer talks about the story of a struggling hero who works hard to reach his dreams and ambitions and succeeds in achieving them. But after his death, he wrote on his grave the phrase "do not try." This strange phrase that no one expected to write on the grave of this ambitious person who sought to achieve overwhelming success after years of failure. But the hero did not give up the throne of his failure and saw that his success is not a win, but rather a failed person, and he accepts this fact despite from everything, and feel comfortable with himself. In the end, he did not become famous by becoming a better person, but succeeded from the severity of his failure. This is what the author expressed in his book when he said, "Self-improvement and success often occur together, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're the same thing." That is, all the dreams we have and the advice we have are always based on what we lack, such as learning the best ways to make money because you are convinced that your salary is low, and you try stupid, foolish exercises through which you imagine yourself to be a more successful person because you do not see yourself successful enough. That is why the writer advises us to stop thinking badly, to accept our bad sense of everything, as if someone had sprinkled us with the magic powder of indifference, to stop the hellish cycle that repeats itself, to stop ourselves from feeling this bad. Second, happiness is a problem. Through this paragraph, the writer tells us the story of the king's son who lived dear and honored and does not lack anything from life. But when he grows up and decides to go out from behind the walls of the palace built by his father, he sees a people full of poverty and disease, and he is shocked by the horror of what he saw and concludes how silly his life is. And here he decides to run away stealthily to live that life and discover its essence. So he becomes a vagrant and tastes the taste of torment. But in the end, he does not reach his goal, and that the pain did not teach him the thing that he wants, and even remains a poor homeless roaming the country. This is what made him reach a certain wisdom, which is that life itself is a kind of suffering, suffered by the rich because of their wealth, and the poor because of their poverty. This does not mean that all types of suffering are all equal, as there is suffering more painful than other sufferings. Our pain is not a defect. It is it that teaches us the things we should pay attention to when we are young, helps us see what is good for us and what is vice versa, helps us understand our limits, and in the end, happiness comes from solving problems, and solving a problem is what creates happiness. You are not special. Through this chapter, the writer tells us the story of an active person who values himself to the fullest, and that he is an important person with his perspective and all people need him. And he has a list of important people around the world who have dealt with him and asked for his advice, and he does not stop talking about himself. But in fact, he is not that much and much less, and he still absorbs his parents' money for fun, parties, and living, and always tries to convince business owners to share it with them. And when you criticize him, he describes you as a stupid ignorant who jealous of him. This is what can be called high self-esteem. And many studies have indicated that people who evaluate themselves highly are better performers and have fewer problems. So self-esteem in the 70s became a topic that psychotherapists and teachers emphasize as part of educational policy. For the protagonist, this subject is more bad than good. Self-esteem is not only enough, as he had to sacrifice part of his self-esteem in order not to face problems in his life. The value of suffering. Here, the writer talks about the story of the Japanese lieutenant who was told by the emperor during the days of America's war on Japan to fight for the last breath and not give up. And this is what made him not believe anything related to the end of the war, and to come out of the bush to return to their country, where he remained 30 years after hiding in the bush for nothing but living on insects and rodents, and sleeping on the dirt, in a life full of suffering. And in return, this young man lives a free life, and wastes his time and presents his life at risk. only to reach something impossible to reach, which is a myth. And here the writer refers to the life of the lieutenant and his friend, which he wasted on things that were not useful and harmful to the soul, only to later fall into regret. But while some of the Japanese people considered this lieutenant to be an icon of loyalty, the other section considered him an icon of stupidity. And here we conclude that the measure you use to measure your success or failure is not what everyone uses. So you should not think too much about others, because when you are looking for their satisfaction with this matter, you are looking for the impossible. You are always choosing. The writer discusses this paragraph 3 stories of famous people who are exposed to circumstances beyond their control, and each of them invested in his way. For example, some of them wanted to commit suicide, in the end to retreat from this and become an icon of psychology in America, and some of them started again to avenge his survival, but he remained unhappy because he did not forget the past despite his new successes. And some of them were like the story of the second hero but wrote a happier ending for him, and all because they decided to control with pain, and each of them in his way. All these men did was realize that they had to be responsible for everything in their lives regardless of external circumstances, and they had to fight to improve their situation, not blame fate. Life is full of things that make us unhappy, but whoever cares about our happinesses, we are only responsible for that. And we are the ones who must strive for our happiness. And on the other hand, not everything is made by life, but there are many things made by our hands. We are not always the party innocent. We have to know that part of our tragedy is caused in one way or another. You are wrong about everything, but so am I. The writer talks in this paragraph about a hero who spent his life believing that all the ideas that he had are true and certain, from when he was a child and adolescent until adulthood. But the ideas of each stage changed in the other stage, which is certainly expected to happen. But in our current stage we carry stubbornness that makes us think that we have reached the end, there is nothing left absent from us, and our ideas are correct, and that we will continue forever. But the ideas of each stage, it has changed in the other stage. And this is what made the hero confused, because he was constantly changing. The writer has considered that certainty is the enemy of evolution. Instead of running after certainty, we have to be in a state of constant doubt. Doubt in our beliefs, in our feelings, and what the future may hold for us. Instead of striving to always be right, we should look for the error in our lives, because we are always wrong. And this is the spirit of openness and change. As we laughed at ideas before us, those in the generation after us will come and laugh at our foolish thoughts. The error gave them a chance to grow and develop, and therefore the mistake is not as bad as you expect. Failure is the way forward. The magnitude of your success is based on how many times you've failed at something. If someone is better than you at something, they probably failed in it more than you failed. And if someone is worse than you, it is probably because of the pain of the long learning process that you went through. This is explained by the writer, who gave the example of a young child when he learns to walk, how much he will eventually fall. So you have to remember well and be convinced well that you cannot be successful in the things you do not want to fail with. When you avoid failure, you avoid success as well. In any case, the measure of failure you can control and determine. It is important, of course, to link failure to something you do not fear. Then you can progress, forget about failure, and go your way. The importance of saying no. Travel is a fantastic self-development tool because it extricates you from the values of your culture and shows you that another society can live with entirely different values and still function and not hate themselves. You have to reject something to become meaningful. If you don't encounter something better than something else, or more desirable for you than the other, you are an empty human being living your life without meaning, living a life without values and purpose. As for the desire to avoid rejection at all costs, or your desire to avoid confrontations, or your desire for everything to be harmonious and coordinated, it is a form of an excessive sense of entitlement. Its owner cares to be excellent all the time, and does not feel any worse and does not want anyone to make him feel bad. So they live a life of pleasure and self-absorption, avoid failure and any kind of suffering. Finally, and then you die. In the face of the inevitability of death, there is no justification at all for giving into one's fear, embarrassment, or shame, because it's all more than the grip of nothing. If I spend most of my short life avoiding the painful and disturbing, it means that I avoid being alive. Death scares us, and because it scares us, we avoid thinking about it, even if it affects someone close to us. But in the end, if it were not for the existence of death, everything would seem insignificant to us and all values and standards would be zero. The lesson is that our life is not a coincidence. We have created a purpose, a goal that we did not know, a goal that we will know halfway or at the end of the road, or we may not know it, but it certainly exists, some purpose of our existence. But you can enhance that more. With your hand you can create the tent. With your death you will think that everything will end. But the story of your immortality you can write. You can make others remember you by something, by developing something that enters you into scientific encyclopedias, by a human act. It makes you remember a lot of people whose lives have changed.